Julia O'Neill's here to talk to us about, she'll explain what it is she's going to talk about.
Good morning.
Welcome.
We'll push down a review of the minutes, we'll push out until after the guests are
Oh,
gone.
thank you. Is this the mic that works? Is that on? Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Oh, perfect. That's perfect. Well, good morning, and thank you so much for having me this morning. I know I've been trying to make it over, but the commitments in the office have been great. And sorry, I'm a little winded from 2 sets of stairs this morning. But I just wanted to come out. I had reached out to Alan and Ed about coming and trying to build a relationship, a little better relationship, and present some of the seeings that I'm having going on in the office with housing, and also kind of ask a few questions, if you don't mind, to what some of the solutions might be, if there's anything that you might be able to help with that. So I got a new title as of April. I am Outreach and Resource Coordinator in the Youth and Family Service Office. Though I've been doing that work pretty much for the past 5 years, the job title came with the work that I've been doing. So that was really wonderful. And with that being said, as of July, when Shrewsbury came in to offer some of the clinical help in the office, I have now been able to be out into the community about 20 hours a week. So it doesn't always hit 20 hours, but it's a good option in kind of building relationships with different places, such as the senior center, some of the long-term care facilities, and being at the a pretty set schedule of being at the food pantry every time they're open, at least in the mornings, and then 1 to 2 times a month in the evenings to interface with those families. So that has been great. So I started tracking, as of July, kind of what I've been seeing in the office, in the spreadsheet, and what the needs have been in the community, some quantitative data to kind of be able to bring back. So I thought that I might share some of that with you. I'm just going to tell you that the biggest need that I am seeing is housing and affordable housing. So July, I met and spoke with 11 families that were either needing housing support financially in some way or were losing their housing. So I was like, okay. In August, I met and interfaced with 17 families. So we had our we had our backpack drive, and during that drive time, I met some new people in our community. We set up backpacks above in school supplies above the food pantry, and families are able to come and pick out school supplies for their children. The school supplies are donated by many of the churches. We do, the police have a bucket, the library has a bucket, the senior center has a bucket, and then some local businesses come back every year to support enough school supplies for 230 children. So that was a pretty big drive. And it was a time to be a new face to some of these families that I had not met in our community yet, and kind of tell them about what I do in my role as outreach and what resources we do have available to them in our community, and what our state also has to offer for them. And that's when I heard a lot of what was kind of going on with them. They didn't know where to turn. I was lucky that one of the retired interpreters from the school, who has become one of my very dear friends, volunteered her time during that time, so we were able to bridge some of the language barriers that we did have, which was very helpful. And another one that currently works for the school also donated her time to help with Portuguese speaking. So, so with that being said, the past 2 weeks I've helped people with raft applications. I've helped 4 people put in raft applications. I have not found out. I was trying to reach out to them this week. I have not found out if it was approved yet, but I haven't heard from them, so fingers crossed. I wanted to just let you know that when these families are doing raft applications, they are very overwhelming to them. So collecting the paperwork and documentation. And, I give the resource out first, trying to encourage them to try it on their own. but sometimes it's just too overwhelming. And when they're dealing with the stresses in their life, to try to get things to upload or scan in or have a computer that's working because they're trying to do it on their phone has been big barriers. So a lot of times they will come and meet me either at the library, because the library has computers, or they'll come and meet me in the office, and we have a laptop and we work on it together. I have them do the majority of it, but sometimes I might help with scanning because I really want them to know the process. But I think just having me there to support is also a big just a big relief for them to have a second set of eyes. And so with that being said, a lot of times it's not one time or 2 times that they come in, it's 3 times that they come in, because if I left them saying, you have to upload your pay stubs, you didn't bring them with me, there's barriers to getting them to do that. So then their raft application is timed out because it's been now 2 weeks and they haven't gotten them in, so they're back in and we're starting the process over again. So, and that is just not an uncommon story, because they come in just thinking we can do it without all of the paperwork, or they're having issues with getting the paperwork. So it's it can take some time. But I have seen raft work for a lot of families. It did go down from $10,000 to $7,000. And what I'm seeing for the rents, that might cover 2 to 3 months, because everybody's rents have gone up. I'm working with families that rents used to be, $2,500, and now they're $3,500 over at Windsor Ridge, and actually even Arrive is around $3,500, I believe, for a 3-bedroom. I'm working with some families that have been in our community for a long time that have 8 children. So that is another barrier of finding housing for families that are large families. And so that has kind of been a barrier to trying to help them move out of their, with a job loss, having to find affordable housing or somewhere where they could even move here in Westborough has been really hard. And their kids are all in the school systems. So yeah, and then the second, so housing is my first. Most people come with housing needs, then food needs is the second. So just some interesting data on that is I've been working with Melissa over at the school system, just kind of school, and asked her, what are you seeing for numbers? Because I'm at the food pantry and it's a little bonkers over there. We're getting 54 families in the morning when I'm there, and and then they're getting about almost the same, about 30 to 40 families at night. I mean, they're providing food to 250 people on a Thursday. And then even the seniors and deliveries are up over to 50 deliveries. So it's getting really bonkers over there. I'm just curious how, could this even rise more? What are you seeing? So she said, Julia, I'm going to run you the list of the families and the numbers. So she passed me the numbers, and we have, now lunch is free and breakfast is free at the school right now. But those that have gotten in their paperwork, because not everybody has to get their paperwork in for their kids to get the free lunches, there was over 600 children getting free lunch, and there was 64 children qualifying for reduced lunch. That was such a staggering number to me, just knowing how food insecurity and how many were on SNAP and things like that was just kind of staggering to me, because I feel like the food pantry is doing great work, the Free Little Pantry is doing great work, but boy, we could even see a lot more coming through the doors with the rise of how everything is going. So I kind of was surprised by that. And then what was told to me is that Hastings has such a high amount of children that qualify that the federal government is even stepping in now to provide support. So, back to the housing front, and I can go on and on and on, but I just feel like I'm not sure what our solutions are to helping some of these families. Some of the resources that we have had available are no longer available. Some of those local agencies that could help with a rent or help, cover some utilities are really stretched themselves. And a lot of times we're not having a lot of answers for these families for assistance. So I know that there'd been some talk, Ed had mentioned, and so had Alan, that you had working on some ideas to have, or some upcoming things to help with assistance in some capability and capacity. So I just kind of wanted to ask a question. What is that? When will it be available? How will it be available? And, you know, if you don't have that information today, I would just love to be in the loop of that. So that's kind of my spiel.
Julia, the rental assistance that you think you're seeing need for,
Yeah.
is it bridging assistance for a period of 3 or 4 or 5 months, or is it long-term assistance that, you know, we're really talking folks who just don't have an income stream that can support, in which case you need a multi-year
Yeah.
assistance program?
That's a really good question. It's a real balance, but I am knowing that a lot of families have they've either had a sick loved one, which has really inhibited the availability of somebody being able to work, or a job loss. And with that, they haven't gotten a job yet, and they've gone through their savings, you know, and really hard to come and ask, but, you know, for help. But I'm glad that we've built a relationship that they can, yeah. So it's been a combination. When I'm working with the families, I say, you know, I'll help you find clothes for your kids. I'll help get your kids diapers. I'll help get your kids food or your family food. I'll link you to free mental health services. But please just pay your rent. Like, there is assistance out there, but it's not always accessible to all. And so if, like, I can help get all the other stuff, just pay your rent. Because what I am seeing is when the families are getting evicted and they have nowhere to go. There's no homeless shelters available, you know, and there's nothing available. And now that they've been evicted, as they're trying to find housing, their credit is bad. Nobody's taking it. It doesn't matter if they're qualifying for RAFT. They have to actually have the landlord accept RAFT before they get the money. And they're not able to even be accepted because their credit is bad. So a lot of times they're moving out of Westborough, which might be the answer for some of these people. And they realize that it just can't always be in Westborough. But we're seeing that they're having to sometimes move into unsafe situations where they're sharing a room in a house because that's all they can afford. And I'm seeing that a lot more, that there are people, you know, taking in others and charging them $500, $700 a month for a room and a shared bathroom, a shared kitchen. So that is definitely happening. Even those that are in rental situations, if they're having a hard time, they're trying to find roommates because they're having a hard time affording it. So yeah, it's as you talk to them, like, they're really creative to try to figure out how to afford their housing and stay in their housing, but sometimes it's just not working out for them.
Julia, I really appreciate all of the numbers that you brought to us this morning. That's really helpful data. And I was curious, as you were talking about the 11 families in July and the 17 families in August, with the family.
If I may,
What?
What was that, Alan?
if I may provide some information about the rental assistance program.
Oh, sure. Kate was just asking a question. I didn't know if
Did
you
you
heard
not?
her.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I didn't hear.
That's okay.
Can
yeah.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you so much for bringing the numbers to our meeting this morning. I think it's really helpful for us to hear about that. And I was, as I was saying, I was curious about the family makeup of the 11 families in August and the 17 families or the 11 families in July and the 17 families in August. And then you were talking about the larger families, you know, some families with 8 children. So I'm curious as to just like the average size family
Sure.
that you're seeing, or if it really is like run the gamut.
I am, and it was interesting as I was looking through, I kind of just eyeballed it to see when I came over if I got this question. I'm seeing most of the time it is a single adult with 2 children, usually around that.
Okay.
Yep. 2 children.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful just to kind of think about when we're thinking about
Yeah.
needs and new developments, like what that might look like.
Mm-hmm.
The average rent is also really helpful to hear. Like the $3,500 at Arrive for a 3-bedroom is a really helpful
And Windsor Ridge. Yeah.
statistic. And then the number of children who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch, I think, is also a really helpful statistic for us to hear. I just did some quick math. That's 17% of the student population, and that's only
That's right.
counting folks who actually fill out the application. So
Right.
it's large. It's likely larger than that. And, you know, we just had this housing production plan report that indicated that about 5% of our families, or the residents in Westborough, are living below the federal poverty line. So I think that, you know, there's below the federal poverty line, and then there's also still not able to meet your needs. And so I think that there is a large population in Westborough that people don't know are struggling. And so I really appreciate you bringing that data to this meeting today.
And besides the families, with my outreach, I did hear that there was a potential of 2 seniors who were going to be evicted in some capacity from the Highlands, which was also very kind of eye-opening to me. And so, you know, also working with Stephanie and talking about some of these situations, and by me going in and building relationships with some of the staff and some of the residents, hearing these stories is kind of like, ooh, okay, what do we do with our seniors? Like, you know, besides those that are in their homes, what are those that have used all their assets and are living in these facilities that have taken all their money for years and now don't have money, you know, and maybe still are not at the point of living in a nursing home. You know, that's also just a front that I hadn't really interfaced with before. So I just wanted to also share that little bit of information. And Stephanie from the Senior Center may have more of that, but these are just what I have heard. So,
It'd be interesting to ask her to come to a meeting sometime. I'm also wondering, you talked about the unsafe conditions that some people are living in.
Yeah.
And there was actually a story in the news yesterday that I heard about Massachusetts tenants living in really unsafe conditions because landlords don't have an incentive to make repairs because there is no housing stock, so they can get away with not repairing things that desperately need to be repaired. And so I was curious if you have been working with the public health department at all around and what you're seeing related to just safety and conditions of living.
So I have had families reach out in the past to the public housing, to the
Public health.
public health, and unfortunately, those families have lost their housing. They are, once they make a report, they go month to month, and then they have no housing. And this is also working with the interpreters who are on the ground with the families. We talk about some of the situations, whether it's a cockroach problem, things that could be very, and small children. Like there was one woman that got a cockroach in her ear because they just wouldn't take, and then she was in the hospital, and you know, there was, and just not taking care of it, and then eventually ending up being evicted or going month to month or having their rent raised. And so there's it's hard. It's really hard for them to want to complain about the unsafe living situations because they know the alternative, and they know that there is no stock, no place to go, and they have their support system here. They have their services here. You know, they're going to the food pantry, they're getting their diaper, you know. So, which is really unfortunate because I had something come up, and I did talk with the interpreter, and I did talk with women, and she's like, oh no, like, because they've seen what's happened to some of the families that have, you know, which is really.
Alan, if we see if the other trustees have questions, and then we'll have you give us a quick once-over of the program. Other folks have questions for Julia? Okay. Alan, could you kind of give us an overview of the program that we're implementing?
Oh.
We can't hear you.
You're on mute.
Okay, you think I know how to do this by now. So the Housing Trust has signed a contract with Metro West Collaborative Development, who will be administering an emergency rental assistance program. The types of assistance are designed to fill the need that at the time we created the program we were seeing, and I think are really reinforced by what Julia has talked about here this morning. So one aspect of the assistance would be short-term assistance, helping cover rent while a household applies for raft or other resources. Knowing and hearing from Julie about how challenging the raft application is, and she talked about the time it even takes to get all the information together, what she didn't really mention is that it can take anywhere up to 90 days for that application to be processed. And that's an eternity when you're facing eviction. And so one aspect of the assistance will be to provide interim rental assistance while someone's applying for raft to cover that gap until the raft money kicks in. Another type of assistance will be mitigation of rent increases. So if someone's facing a large rent increase, there is a form of assistance in the program where the trust can subsidize part of that rent increase so that the apartment remains affordable to the household, and eviction is prevented. And so there are different types of assistance available. Where we are right now is we did create a working group within the trust to get the program launched and to work with Metro West Collaborative Development to finalize the paperwork and launch the program. And those kickoff meetings should be scheduled over the next week or so. And we expect it'll take a couple weeks to get things up and running and then to get marketing materials and information out back to the community. Julia, you are more than welcome to be directly part of that effort if you'd like.
I would love that. Thank you for the invite.
Okay. And we will include you on that.
Excuse me, Julie, in terms of the complexity of the application, I mean, if as you work with folks, you come up with areas where maybe we could change or improve the application, we'd certainly be looking to hear that.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely will. And thank you for including me, because maybe I can help that move along to maybe make things easier for the barriers like of what you're looking for.
We've got a balance between adequate verification and fiduciary responsibility and things of that sort.
Yeah.
And understanding
Yeah,
that the population is challenged.
Yeah, thank you.
Helen?
Yeah. Our application for this program is simple. It's not much different than what we used during COVID-19.
Sure.
In that emergency rental, we found that, we're able to do enough income in rent validation very quickly without overburdening the tenant or the landlord.
Question for you. Have you ever thought of a partial? So like if people are only able to afford $900, like besides, with the increase, but just in general, instead of giving the whole month, have you thought about a partial assistance? Because sometimes people are just coming to me saying, I'm falling $600 short, but it might be $600 short for the next couple months because they reduced their hours, because it's not the holiday season, so they're not working the extra hours. But just a thought.
Yes, partial is part of the program.
Great.
The goal is to fill the gap, right? So if someone has a rent increase or a temporary situation, it's analyzing what they can afford to pay and making up that gap for that period of time.
Sure. Now, and is there also a max to that? Like for each family, is there a max that, like with Raft, there's $7,000? Is it kind of depending on what comes in, or have you thought about what a max might be?
There's some guidelines that are in the program guide, and I'll share those with you.
Sure.
Once we're out of the meeting. But the goal of the program is to be flexible.
Okay.
To provide the assistance, and we've allocated a significant amount of money to the program. So we have an estimate, a sense at this point of need and how long that funding will last, but we'll continue to monitor, obviously we'll monitor and evaluate that as things move forward.
Oh, great. Well, this is very exciting, and thank you on the behalf of the families that I serve, because, they may not be at the table, but they are always very grateful, and really I've been so appreciative. So many tell me how well supported they've felt in Westborough, and just are really grateful to be able to be here and raise their children here and, feel the love from the community. So thank you.
Julia, if there's no more questions, well, thank you for.
You're welcome. I'm off to the
for
food
visiting
pantry.
with us, and, you're welcome to come
Yeah,
back again.
thank you. And please share my information, or if you'd like my information, like just to have, or if you have any questions.
If Alan, you have contact information for Julia?
Yes.
Yeah,
do too.
please, yeah,
Please
and
put
so
it in
does
the
Kate.
minutes
I'm always happy
so
to
folks have it.
talk
Thank
about housing, and I really appreciate it. So have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
Thank
Julia.
you.
Thank you. Folks, if you're okay, we'll put off the minutes again and give Jennifer a chance to do her presentation. I guess we're talking about inclusionary zoning, is that correct?
Yes.
Great.
Okay. Should be able to see the,
Oh, yes, yep, it's showing up here, I don't know
okay.
for a second.
Yep. There we go. Yep.
Do you
Quite
see,
decide if it wants to show up or not.
There it goes.
okay, there we go. I see the presentation mode now on my side. So you see the screen. I don't see it up there, but
Yep.
as long as you can
here.
see it.
Yeah,
Okay.
we got it on the screen here.
Oh,
There it
okay,
is.
great.
We got rid of Alan.
Great.
Bye, Alan.
Alan's
Yeah, that
controlling
one's a
the-
little hard to see. Okay.
It's okay. I can be invisible.
My name is Jenny Gingras. I'm the Director of Planning for Westborough, and I am here to present an article that we will have on the October town meeting warrant for inclusionary zoning. So I'm going to kind of give you the Cliff Notes version of the first few slides, because I know that all of you know what affordable housing is, and I think you know what inclusionary zoning is, and who qualifies for affordable housing. What is an affordable unit? I know that you are very well versed in that, but for the purpose of town meeting and at the planning board hearing next week, I will be taking a little bit of a deeper dive for the public. So I know that you all are aware of this also, but these are the current income limits for fiscal year 24 or last year. And I did add in the income limits for 110% AMI, which is part of the proposal of this inclusionary bylaw, but those will need to be modified slightly. Those are from 2020. I'm still working on getting the current income thresholds in there. Again, I think this is a little redundant for you all. Why do we need inclusionary zoning? We know that Massachusetts under Chapter 40B requires all cities and towns to have a 10% of their total housing stock designated as affordable or on their subsidized housing inventory, and that communities that don't have that 10% are subject to comprehensive permit filings, also known as 40Bs. And then in Westborough, we are thankful that we are above that 10%. We've done a really good job, I think, of staying above that threshold. And as of the 2020 census, we had 11.74%.
If I could, Jennifer,
Yeah.
the 975 total affordable units, those are those that technically qualify as being affordable. They're not necessarily being sold or rented at affordable rates.
That is a
Correct? I
good
mean,
point. This is
we
the
need to be
subsidized
careful
housing.
As a housing trust,
Mhm.
that somewhere along the line, we're gonna need to tease out of that number the units that actually can be afforded by people at 80% or 50%.
Yes.
So we have a better understanding of, because I know, I don't know the numbers, but a considerable fraction of the 975 units are actually market rate units
Mhm.
that technically are included because of the way the laws are written.
That is correct. And I believe that Ed Bain had done
Ed
a
has the
calculation.
He's got,
Yeah.
he's got some, I'll
Yeah, I
ask
know
Ed.
he's
Yeah.
mentioned them to me before, so
That
he
that
definitely
would
has
be
that breakdown of real
Yeah.
affordable versus
right.
technical affordable.
And yes, we should have that data, and that is an excellent point. I could change this to units as the subsidized housing inventory. But you are correct, that does not reflect the actual affordable units
Yeah,
that have the income restriction.
My personal recommendation for town meeting, this is great, but for the trust, when we start trying to decide what should we be doing? How should we be attacking the problem? Probably need to go to the next level of detail.
Yes, absolutely. So in the Westborough bylaw, we have a 10 to 20% affordability requirement for all residential development. And right now, it's broken out into different sections of the bylaw. There's a requirement in the open space subdivision, there's a requirement in the transit-oriented village, and so on, as you can see up here. So there's the affordability component is designated differently in each section of the bylaw, so it's not consistent. So what this bylaw will do, well, it will combine all of the affordability requirements into one bylaw for consistency. So in each of those bylaws, we would just reference this new bylaw to allow for that consistency. Again, it consolidates it all into one. It also adds a minimum unit threshold where there was not one before, except for in one section. And the reason that we chose the 10 unit was that it came out of the economic feasibility analysis that we did as part of the MBTA zoning. That took into consideration the cost of construction compared to what the rent charge is or what a mortgage would be, so that it was looking at what is financially feasible for a developer to build without having a loss on profit. Which is really important because we want the developers to build these units, but if it's not financially feasible, they're not going to build it. And we actually had run into a couple issues where someone came in and wanted to build 3 apartments, above a commercial space, and they weren't able to because it triggered an affordability requirement of that 20%, and it was not financially feasible for the developer to be able to put in an affordable unit. So it's really important to have a minimum threshold. The other thing that's modified is the level of affordability. Currently, the requirement is up to an 80% AMI, or area median income. So that is typical of a lot of towns, but we're finding after doing the downtown plan and the housing production plan that 80% AMI is not realistic for everybody. We need to be seeing a lower AMI, so we're looking at requiring a 50% and then up to 110%, because what we're seeing that even if a family meets or has the median income of $128,000 a year, they still can't afford a market rate home in Westborough. So that's why we're trying to diversify the housing stock and the requirements. In the bylaw, it also adds a requirement of a local preference for all of the affordable units. So it wouldn't necessarily be in this order, but we would ask it to be marketed to current residents, employees of businesses in town, town of Westborough employees, and then veterans. And we do that in a lot of planning board decisions now, but this would put it in the bylaws, so we wouldn't always have to remember to add it into the decision. And then the last thing is that it adds a requirement for 25% of the affordable units to be ADA compliant. Part of the studies that we did showed that we are definitely missing out on units that are ADA compliant while also affordable. So after reviewing, like I said, the economic feasibility analysis, the housing production plan, and even the downtown plan, which showed a lot of our demographics and housing needs, we decided on breaking it down to 2 tiers of affordability. So you still have the 20% affordability requirement like we do today, but it's broken up a little bit more so that we reach that diverse range. So we have for any rental projects, 50 to 80% AMI for 15% of the development. And then on top of that, an extra 5% at that 110% AMI.
Am I correct then that the tier 1 for rentals, doesn't guarantee that 50% will be represented?
That is correct. So the proposal right now is that they have two options. The AMI must average no more than the 65% with
Okay.
that, or they can divide it equally between 50% and
Okay, so
80%.
There is some language in there that forces something below 80%
Yes.
on some fraction. Yeah, that's great, thank you.
Right.
That's a good clarification for me.
So
Ownership is strictly at 80% though, right?
yes, and you know, we're seeing more rental projects come in than the home ownership, and the home ownership projects are a little bit more difficult for developers to build something that's at that lower AMI.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to get below 80%.
Yes,
Not totally impossible, but it is very difficult.
it is very difficult, and so we did not, we want to recognize, again, we want the developers to come in and build these units, but we saw the ability more so in the rental projects to ask for that lower AMI. So that explains what that is, and they will have to do the calculations on their own, come to the planning board and show what they're proposing.
I think we've had some pushback from developers and even the 60%, because it does make it a great deal less affordable or predictable for them as they're developing. These numbers here, the 65% or divided equally between 50% and 80%, is that, again, is that comes out of the feasibility study? Like that was a point where we thought it would likely be feasible for some of these projects, or how did we get to that point? And I'm going to say before you answer that, we see that there's a stark need, I think, for housing that targets folks below the 80%. So in my mind, this is a good add. I'm just curious about how we got there, and if we have a sense that from developers that will work for their projects.
Yeah, we have been talking to a few developers for recent projects about whether that could be affordable, and the answer is yes. They just need that flexibility to be able to stagger it. They would not be able to make all of the units, 60% AMI or 50% AMI. They would need to stagger it to be able to make their numbers work.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that we see there's a stark need for that. So in my mind, this is a very positive proposal here.
The other part of this is that in the zoning bylaw, there's one section that allows for a financial contribution in lieu of providing the on-site units, which we really don't want to see. But, we don't want to close out the possibility, because there may be some obscure circumstance where it's necessary to have that payment from the developer instead of them providing the units. So because of that, we did add in that's a special permit from the planning board to be able to make that financial contribution instead of providing the units. And there's specific findings that the planning board has to find from the proposal. So they must find that there's an unusual net benefit to achieve the town's housing objectives by allowing a payment. Maybe we have a project in the pipeline that it would be more beneficial to have that money for instead of them building the units. They have to look at the current balance of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and then the town's current SHI. If we were well above the 10%, we might not be so worried about getting those units. We might instead want to have more money put in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And then the planning board, it will be up to them to decide where to designate the funds to. So they could go to the Affordable Housing Trust or the Senior and Disabled Tax Relief Fund, as it's currently specified in the bylaw.
Are those the only two funds that could, are those the only choices to the planning board? Or
No.
Are there other choices, any other municipal purpose?
Yes, we're leaving it pretty broad so that the planning board can determine, because we recognize that there could be different effects from a multifamily going in depending on the time, and it may need to go towards something else.
Are you excluding contributions to the general fund? I.e. operating expense?
It's not specifically in there,
Okay.
but I could add language that it has to be towards a specific fund, and not including the general fund. But typically they
I can see
don't.
pressure developing to put money into the general fund because it reduces taxes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
personally, I don't think that would be, I believe we want to make sure that this goes to funds like the senior, benefit of seniors, benefit of housing trusts,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing.
yeah, and I don't know what models we might be looking at, but I'm wondering if there is a way, similar to what Hank was saying, if there's a way to specify that preference would be given to the organizations or the funds that would create or support housing in some way. Because again, if they're paying this, it's designed to support housing. So maybe that just can be made more explicit somehow.
Yeah, yeah. I can bring that back to the planning board.
If I may,
Oh, yep.
on this topic, just so folks know, the detail within the bylaw calculates the payment as twice the 80% AMI level for a family of 4.
Yes.
So currently that's 97,800 is the 80% income limit for a family of 4 for 2024. So double that in today's dollars would be 195,600. So $195,600 would be the payment per unit. And because it's tied to the HUD numbers, those would increase as housing costs increase, and income and AMI levels adjust over time. And so also the comments we have here today, and at the end of Jen's presentation, I'll share some comments I've shared previously. We could vote to send over as a formal request to the planning board for changes to consider in the bylaw in advance of the public meeting next week.
Yeah, that might make some sense since we're sort of off the cuff providing some thoughts here. It might be helpful if we sort of wrote
Yeah.
them up. But I do like that idea that there's a limit specified, because I think one of the challenges we've encountered before, and Westborough generally has encountered before, is that when we've received payments in lieu to the town, they haven't necessarily been enough to actually develop or support additional affordable housing units. So setting a reasonably high amount per unit could be helpful in that regard to ensure that these could actually be meaningful contribution to whatever substitution is going to be in place.
Right, absolutely, and that calculation, I can't take credit for it. There were other towns that had come up with that, because it does change every year, depending on what the cost of housing is, so it's a really good thing to tie it to. It's easy. So this is my last slide. Why is this change needed? I think you all know why this is needed. But we really want to encourage more mixed income housing developments. And that's, we're not seeing that. We're seeing the 80% AMI units and then market rate. So I think this will allow for a healthier mix of all levels of affordability. And then, of course, it's recommended in the housing production plan recently to diversify those requirements to reflect the current need in Westborough. So we're not just looking at, getting these units on the SHI inventory, which is important, but we want it to actually reflect the need in Westborough. So that's the end of my presentation. And yes, as Alan was saying, if you would be able to provide a letter or a report of some sort to the planning board. We have our first public hearing on Tuesday at 6 p.m. in the Forbes building. And so any comments or requested revisions, since we already posted the article online, the planning board would need to decide on whether they want to incorporate those.
So questions from the trustees? Alan, you have any more questions?
Yeah, a couple of points I want to discuss and see if the trustees would want this included in the letter. So far, for comments and feedback, I have feedback that, mitigation funding is an option, should not go to the general fund, and preferably to funds that create or support housing, directly or indirectly. A couple of other comments. It's important to know that the Tier 1 affordable housing would be SHI compliant. The Tier 2 is workforce housing. And so that while it's affordable housing, it won't contribute to our SHI quantities. I'm wondering, that's currently proposed at the 110% AMI level, but EOHLC defines workforce and moderate income housing as up to 120%, which happens to be the guideline we're using the down payment assistance program as well. I'm wondering if the bylaw should allow Tier 2 to be up to 120% AMI. And then another comment is that having an average of 65% AMI means a 50-50 split between the 50% and the 80% levels. And I'm concerned that, well, we've gotten feedback from developers that that's possible, that other developers might come in and object, saying that it's not feasible. And so they could challenge that part of the bylaw and get a judge to grant them a different ratio. And that's a process that's time consuming and expensive for the town as well. Additionally, thinking that 70% MI is what's needed for the low income housing tax credit at the state and federal level. I'm wondering if we should set that average at 70%, which would mean a 2/3, 1/3 split between the 80% and 50% AMI levels. I think it's still ensuring that we get 60% or 50% AMI units built, but it also gives a little more flexibility in the quantities and the distribution of those, and I think it'll significantly reduce the chance that a decision to enforce a 50-50 mix gets challenged in court.
Yeah, another way of looking at it, Jeremy, I'm not sure where the mix of 50% to 80% came from. I don't know who did the financial modeling that this is feasible for developers, because in my experience, and really in the trust experience, at 50%, the developers are looking for subsidies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have any issue with increasing it to 70%. I was trying to capture the lower income levels as well, and looking at other towns and what they have done, that's the range. However, 70% might be more comfortable based on your experience with developers also.
Well, and then the other risk is that we want people to develop these units here, not go looking at a town that's a little easier. So we definitely want to weigh that in the balance as well. Even if they don't go all the way to challenging it in court, we want to be a genuine contender for the development. So in my mind, maybe we do want to think about, especially if you have any data on it, that's, the 70% mix would be more feasible. Maybe we would want to encourage that. Again, I don't have data on this. I don't know that we really do. So it's a little bit of we're basing this on our experience and some of the ideas that we've
recently had a couple of developers come to us looking for subsidies even at the 80% level, right?
Sure.
So, again, I don't know the right answer. I don't know if there's any way to. It'd be nice to have the flexibility that setting this percentage was something that was outside the bylaw, but still, we still had a way of changing it without going to town meeting. I don't know if that can be done. I'm just not a good enough attorney to.
Well, we can add into the bylaw that the planning board could have the discretion to modify the AMI levels depending on the circumstances, if that was something.
But up to a limit, perhaps, so that people couldn't come in and say all 80% again and put us right back kind of where we are, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Because, that would be where we are right now at the 80%. And we want to encourage those lower
Something
income.
like a 50% by right and 70% by special permit or something. I don't know how you.
Yeah, that would be a little complicated. I'm
Yeah,
not sure how I
But
would write that.
I think I think if you look at changing the average from 65 to 70%, it means you can do a mix of 60% and 80% units, or you could do fewer, it would let you do fewer 50% units and more 80% units. So you have the ability, the developer has the ability to come up with a program that's financially flexible, and certainly I think a little more flexible than with a 65% average. I'll also point out that when you have, that there are state funds, grants, and 0% loans available that only are available for projects with sufficient units at 50% and 60% AMI. So there's actually more state funding available when you start putting 50 and 60% units in the mix on a significant scale.
I'll also
And
point out.
so, go ahead.
That we are altering the percentage required. So right now it's 20% at the 80% AMI, and we're trying to offset that impact to the developer of the lower AMI by saying, okay, well, 5% can be at the 110% or potentially 120%.
And raising it to where it starts with with 10 units as opposed to 5 also relieves burden on smaller developers and developments.
I guess the other comment I had, it wasn't clear to me that the distribution of affordable units is proportional to, in terms of number of bedrooms and amenities, is the same as the distribution across the whole complex, the whole proposed development, right?
Yep.
Because, one way a developer might just make all of the one-bedroom units the affordable ones, and the four-bedroom units or the three-bedroom units, the 110% or the market rate or whatever. And that would meet the financial criteria, but it doesn't give you the distribution of.
Right. Yeah, I didn't
Unit
explain
size.
it in the PowerPoint, but in the actual bylaw, it does have the requirement that they must be distributed proportionally amongst bedroom
Great.
sizes.
So Jennifer, it sounds like your recommendation is that we decide what we want to say, what recommendation we'd like to make, and provide that in a letter to the planning board.
Yes, I think they would be looking for your feedback, and
Right.
I don't see any issue with any of the proposed revisions that you all have talked about. I think they're reasonable.
Right.
We just needed the planning board to add them in before we close the warrant.
That's great. Alan, does that cover it?
There's actually one more thing, and this is sort of minor technical point. In section F.3 of the bylaw, it talks about the affordability restriction, including a right of first refusal. And I'm going to suggest that we change that wording from right of first refusal to a simple right of refusal. Here's why. First of all, the current deed restrictions we're seeing coming from EOHLC are written as a right of refusal, which means in the initial 90-day sale period, the town can exercise its right to purchase the property at any time. If it's worded as right of first refusal, EOHLC won't authorize the marketing of the property until the town makes the decision. And so what that puts at risk is we can come and say, no, we don't want to exercise right of first refusal. They start marketing the property. It's, they can't find an eligible buyer right away. We've already refused to buy the property. They can then go to an ineligible buyer. If it's simple right of refusal, it means when the property comes on, we can say, start marketing the property. If you don't find an eligible buyer within, say, 75 days, then we will consider using our right of refusal to buy the property and then remarket it again as affordable to an eligible buyer. and prevent it from going to an ineligible buyer, or in some cases, reverting to a market rate unit. So it's sort of the way things are being done now, and it gives us a lot more flexibility.
I have no issue with making that change to the language.
Okay, other questions or,
Thank you very much.
Jennifer,
Yeah,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Very well done. It's good.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
step
you.
forward.
Yeah.
Folks, we need to go back and review the minutes of the meeting, I believe July 11th, and then of August 8th. So,
The August 8th minutes weren't quite ready, so it's just July
Yeah, I
11th.
didn't see August 8th in there. I didn't know I was going crazy.
I'm
The
sorry.
August 8th aren't in the package, just the July 11th.
oh, okay, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. So we'll pass on the August 8th and look for a motion to approve the minutes of July 11th.
Motion to approve the minutes for July 11th?
Second? Second. Any comments, changes? We'll take I guess, we don't need to take a roll call, we'll take a vote.
No, it needs to be roll call because I'm remote. So Edinburgh, yes.
Storm, yes.
Herrera, yes.
Salzman, yes.
Rundell, yes.
Roush, yes, so that's a unanimous, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6,
I just did the same thing in my head.
So-
6 trustees attending, 6 voting yes. So those minutes are approved.
So Hank, one other thing before we move forward.
Yep.
Can I make a motion that the trustees authorize me to send a letter to the planning board
Sure.
requesting the changes to the inclusionary zoning article as discussed?
I make a motion for Alan to create a letter to the planning board for what he just said.
Second?
I'll second.
Second. Comments?
No.
Alan,
Again,
I'll just
yeah.
say I'm happy to help with that if I can in any way. I think you've already
Sure,
thought through
I'll
and you've
draft
written
something
out,
and
yes.
send it to you to look at.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, happy to help with that.
Super. Other comments, questions? All roll call vote? Alan?
Edinburgh, yes.
Storm, yes.
Herrera, yes.
Salzman, yes.
Rundell, yes.
Roush, yes. 6-0. Connector Road. I wasn't sure who was chairing that Connector Road. Ed had been working that. Alan, are you the connector?
I can speak to that.
Right.
Yeah, so where we are with Connector Road is we offered, as you recall, we offered the developer 2 options. One, a small subsidy to increase the affordable housing component from 20% to 25% at the 80% AMI level. And a second option with a significantly larger subsidy for that incremental 5% units, those incremental units, to be at the 60% level. The feedback from the developer is that they're open to that. They agreed with our financial analysis, but the concern of their investors isn't about the subsidy not covering the operational impact. It's on the potential impact on the resale value of the property, should that be the direction of their firm and the investors in the next 10 to 15 years. And so one of the things we looked at, Jenny and I actually had a meeting yesterday with EOHLC, because one of the thoughts and one of the questions was from the developers is, was there something that can be done tax-wise, and is there something that could this be, or would the trust be open to it being a temporary or for a limited duration, not in perpetuity at the 60% level? And so with that, so I sort of came up with a 2-pronged approach. The first would be that we provide a subsidy where those incremental units would be at 60% AMI for a minimum period of time. And that would be, I would push for 15 years. because that's typically when an affordable rental development is sold that's had mass housing finance or mass housing financing, finance authority or mass housing financing, and that pays off the note, which would end the affordability. The typical extension period is 15 years. So the state has a history of saying interim type of housing programs, 15 years. So the thought would be that we would ensure that those incremental units would be at the 60% AMI level for at least 15 years. And at the end of that period, so long as it's a voluntary releasing, a voluntary change of tenancy, meaning it can never be related to an eviction, those units would then go to 80% AMI. And there would still be that requirement that 25% of the units are 80% AMI or less in perpetuity. Now, I want to pair that with the possibilities and sort of with Mass General Law, Chapter 59, Section 5O, the letter O, not 50, which allows municipalities to do a local property tax exemption for affordable rental units. And the thought would be that part of our subsidy or contingency would be that should the town adopt the bylaw and set up regulations around tax breaks, property tax relief for incremental affordable units beyond what's required, that those incremental units would be considered qualified and that the developer would apply to the program. And if accepted in the program, those units would have to stay at 60% AMI as long as they're in that program. And so in effect, there would be financial support on an ongoing basis to keep those units at the 60% AMI level. It's not something that's guaranteed to happen, but it creates more longevity. In a conversation yesterday with EOHLC, they are amenable to having the 60% AMI restricted only for a specific period of time. They told us that they're actually reviewing a proposal from a developer in another municipality, where the municipality has asked for that as well. And their concern is that at the end of that 15-year window, the landlord isn't able to force people out in order to get the higher rents. And so they would be looking for basically saying that each unit would convert to 80% AMI after 15 years only when a tenant voluntarily leaves. And so long as the current tenants stay in the property, it stays at 60% AMI, and if that tenant is evicted, it stays at 60% AMI. So the thought is right now, the current subsidy that we had, that would just have been 80% AMI for 20% of the units and 60% AMI for 5% of the units in perpetuity, the subsidy, total subsidy was going to be $750,000. My suggestion would be that if the 60% AMI is limited to 15 years, that we go back to the original $650,000 number and simply include that potential tax incentive as an option, but obviously we can't require it or stipulate it because we don't know if it'll be in place. Thoughts?
Alan, a question. I don't believe this project's been permitted yet. And so will it?
No, because
will it come under the new bylaw if the new bylaw is enacted?
so it would come under. It has not been permitted yet. So I believe that the bylaw takes effect retroactively to the day that it's posted.
So, I mean, my sense
So
is
this,
I'm only asking because if it comes under that new bylaw, then all these numbers change, right? Because the new bylaw includes includes a lot of these criteria, but with different numbers, so that the developer's proposal will probably be different, and we'll need to start out with, we'll need to have a different negotiation, and it may not be fruitful to keep negotiating.
I'll double check on that. My understanding is because the application's already in, that they're
Maybe
not at the
grandfathered?
time. Yeah, that this would not be impacted by the new bylaw, but I'll double check on that with the timing.
I think that's a really good question, Hank. This is looking at above the 20%. But still, I think that still would affect the general portfolio of affordable units. I really bristle against the timeline, the deadline of the 15 years, only because even though I know the wording is that if a tenant voluntarily leaves, I just feel like there's ways in which people can be pressured to voluntarily leave that would make things very uncomfortable for tenants. And so I do not like that idea. And so I understand that there is this other tax exemption possibility that is probable, but not, 100%. So I'm a little wary about that. This is also not my area of expertise, but I do think, the subsidies are not my area of expertise. The way landlords can treat tenants is something that I have experience in. And so I am very wary against that 15-year cap.
It is kind of high risk setting up, paying the subsidies and setting up an expiration in the future, because you're basically pushing a problem to the future in a sense, and you don't know what the future is going to look like. Got a possibility of a situation like the residences at Westborough Station, where
Right.
there's a substantial dispute about what was really the intent and what the wording really meant. I don't know. I mean, it is risky. If maybe what we have to do to get the deal done, but
The agreement would clearly have to be, and the stipulations in the special permit would definitely have to be well written. The challenge is that, if the subsidy we've offered for those handful of units to be 60% AMI in perpetuity, they're saying that it's not financially feasible for them. They can't make it work. And so the question is, if we're not willing to do, a time limited requirement, are we comfortable with simply increasing the number of SHI units from 20% to 25% at the 80% level? And I'm fine if we say, yeah, for this project, we can't get the 60% component in. We've got the bylaw change coming. That's going to affect future projects. We're okay with that. It means using significantly less cash from the trust, which opens up cash for other opportunities, one of which is next on the agenda. And that's fine. And, from my perspective, that's fine. If we're saying, we'd rather not offer a subsidy for 60% AMI if it's not in perpetuity, that's also fine as a decision and a policy, it's not a policy decision of the trust as well. So what are people's thoughts?
I'm just sort of thinking through what we're getting for our $300,000 to $400,000 of additional subsidy money. It's a temporary offering of units at 60%, and that obviously doesn't sit as well as making it permanent.
Yeah,
We're not getting a whole lot for our
I think
dollars.
My initial thought probably more around what you were saying about going with the 80%, right? So that way there's no nobody can play games in 15 years, because I definitely agree with Kate. There are games that are often played, and that way it takes sort of some of that ambiguity, or how do I get around this even being in play?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, Alan, about, we want to have more affordable units at 50%, right? And so this is a way to do that. But I think we also, Jenny's presentation really gave us a good glimpse of what some other possibilities are here, and that's through policy. And so I think by hoping that this inclusionary zoning passes, and there's some more leeway, or just openings for lower threshold affordability, I think that makes me feel more comfortable than this. I agree with Hank too, it pushes the problem down the road. So I appreciate trying to get to the 5% at 60% AMI. I still think that, if they want to do it, they can do it, and we'll happily give them $750,000 for the rest of perpetuity, or the $750,000 now for the 60% in perpetuity. But I just don't think that I want to play the game of 10 to 15 years down the road, them renegotiating.
Okay, then my sense that's the consensus of the trustees. So I would move that we advise the developers that we're not comfortable with a time-limited adjustment for those incremental 5 units, and that if they're not able to do 60% in perpetuity with the $750,000 subsidy, then we will simply proceed with the lower subsidy to get all 25% of the all 25% SHI units at the 80% AMI level.
Yes.
Was that a second?
Do we need a motion, or we need a
I
second?
just made one, I thought.
Yeah, I think he actually made the motion.
He made the motion, so we need a second.
Second.
We need a roll, any questions or comments, or roll call? Alan?
Edinburgh, yes.
Storm, yes.
Edinburgh, yes.
Herrera, yes.
Salzman, yes.
Rundell, yes.
Roush, yes, so that's 6-0. Fantastic.
Great.
Alan, you've been working Parkman Street?
It's mostly been Ed, but he briefed me. Effectively, this is a home at 15 Parkman Street has 3 units. They're currently rentals. Only, I believe at this point, only one of the units is occupied, and it's by a relative and participant in the trust that owns the property. I included the property card as well as the current updated listing from the real estate agent. The feeling is that if the trust were to buy this property, the best solution would be to do some moderate renovation and repair, and then market these as ownership units, not rental units. We've discussed in the past how we really don't want to be in the landlord business, and it could help increase the availability in the historic downtown district of affordable rental units, given the demands from the senior needs assessment and the housing production plan. Ed was feeling that you'd be probably looking at $250,000 to $300,000 worst case in total renovation costs. The listing of the property has been viewed. We know it's been viewed by a number of private investors. And at the end of last week, the asking price was lowered by $50,000, more than $50,000. And so, at this point, I don't think there's a specific decision to make. Other than that, in my opinion, we should continue to work with the real estate agent to see. We talked to them about if they would be interested in selling at the appraised value, given that the difference between the assessed value, given that the difference between assessed and appraised value would be tax deductible and could offset any taxes that the estate owes due to inheritance and things of that nature. The real estate agent has not gotten back to us on that, but the general sense is that that isn't something that's attractive to them. So, my recommendation is that we continue to look at the property and still consider in the future if we want to make an offer. I don't think this property is not going to move quickly. I personally think we might be able to offer less than the current asking price and get the property. So I just think that's where we're at on this.
Yeah, I'm concerned that $250,000, $300,000 to do an upgrade to current standards, current building codes, and conversion to 3 condos might be a really low estimate. I don't know the property, haven't seen it, no idea to what degree it's been subdivided already, but coming to current building codes on an old building is not easy.
I went with Ed to see the property,
Yep.
and it's in pretty rough shape. It needs some work.
You're not going to do a gut renovation on 3 units for $300,000. So again, I think.
But I'm not sure it needs a gut renovation. I guess maybe would it be worth having, getting someone in to walk through and do, provide us, a rough order of magnitude.
But you could back into it the other way and say, hey, if you bought the property for the assessed value, what would it take in terms of subsidy, given what you could resell the 3 units for after they're finished, and see whether, and then add to that some kind of an amount for upgrade. I'm concerned that you're going to have a real hard time making the numbers work. Again, without seeing the property and understanding where it's at. But I would be reluctant to support selling a property that doesn't meet current building codes.
No, absolutely. I guess the question is it worth, given the uniqueness of the opportunity, is it worth continuing to investigate?
Well, it's worth investigating, but we really got to have when it gets to the point where the owner is interested in working with us, we'd have to go get a more thorough assessment of the upgrade costs.
I think that I like the idea of this going to ownership, like 3 units of ownership. And you were thinking about this being for seniors, Alan, potentially?
Potentially.
Okay. So just curious about like ADA compliance and this is stairs, right?
Yeah, there's 1 unit on the first floor and 2 units on the second floor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, thinking about that. And so I guess I'm just curious, Ken. So Ken went with me to see East Main Street.
Yeah.
Ken's got a really good eye for this kind of stuff. So I'm just wondering if Ken could go and look at it.
Be more than happy to. I know where it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is that you're going to be looking at energy code. You're going to be like ADA, like
Yeah.
you said. There's a lot to this, but where there's a will, there's a way also. So, yeah, let's take a look at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I really like this idea. So I also know that I'm not my area of expertise is not the cost of construction. So that's where I would defer to Ken on this one.
Okay, then I'll let Ed know, and we'll arrange for Ken to take the tour and do his magic.
And is the idea behind that, then eventually we could think about not necessarily buying it, fixing up ourselves, but providing some subsidy to the current owner or to a future developer
We'd
to
have
modify it if
bring-
it made?
We'd have to bring in a developer to
Yes,
do the
yes.
conversion. I mean, at least I don't.
Yeah,
we
so-
wanna be general contractors, that's a little bit challenging.
But so we would acquire the property, and then we would either sell it to a developer who would do the renovation and then sell the units, or that we would hire a general contractor to do the work, and then we would sell the units.
Yep. We're all just sitting on that, Alan. Can you see us?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Do you like what you're seeing?
Yeah.
Don't ask questions like that.
Gorgeous. And just for the record, you should know that Ed called me from the plane that he's on, saying that he was having trouble watching the meeting on YouTube.
Oh, he does not need to be doing that on his rare vacation.
Tell him to focus.
Ed, we appreciate your dedication
So-
if you're watching this.
So are we all closed on Parkman?
Yeah, I think we're all set there.
Yeah.
So cottages, the working group.
Yeah, so we set up a working group. It was, well, I didn't actually put it on this form. I know Hank was going to lead it to go and follow up to do some of the prep work so we could put together an RFP for the project. And I just sort of wanted to bring it forward as an agenda item to say, to review the proposed actions, as that was in the recommendations from the technical assistance we had gotten from MHP. So are there any questions on that? I'm just looking up. So actually, I'm looking back, is that the working group for this project is Hank, Sarah, and myself initially. So I think the three of us should just, after this meeting, schedule a time for a quick phone call to walk through the tasks and start executing.
Sounds good.
So we're on to fall town meeting warrant articles?
Yes. So we talked about the inclusionary zoning article already. The other article that impacts us that's on the warrant is the transfer of funds from the mitigation fund that was part of Pulte's special permit to the trust. This will be a regular transfer that happens every year as those funds become available. The current balance in that fund is $201,194.34. Given that the permit was issued in September, the current year's payment is due. So I will check with Christie. That number might change and go up by an additional $200,000.
So we could probably write the warrant articles that at the motion sets the number?
It's actually, the article's written, so
Okay, so
if it would be changed before the warrant's closed, if the funds have been received.
okay.
That way because a 200,000 difference is significant. So town moderator wouldn't like that. He sort of wants the number. And if the next payment isn't in time for the warrant to close, we would just have another article in March to transfer the funds at that time.
So do we need a motion, or is it?
Nope, this is just
We
an
don't need a
update.
motion, just information that we're on the, we have a warrant, we're on the agenda.
Yep.
Everybody good?
Mhm.
If I could just wind back one, Alan, seems like we should be prepared to speak at the town meeting in support of the zoning article.
Yes.
Possibly we could ask yourself and Ed to draft something up, because we probably ought
Well,
to present, right? I mean, we certainly ought to speak officially and formally as supporters and maybe have some commentary.
Well, so I expect Jenny, or a member of the planning board, will actually do the presentation, the 10-minute presentation for this. We would, Ed or someone or another member of the trust can stand up and say that we, that we vote in support of it, and we can take that vote in our October meeting,
Okay, great,
because that way we'll have the final language.
right. CPC.
And then
update.
we will have, I don't expect we're gonna need slides for the funds transfer, but we'll have them just in case.
Right, shouldn't need. CPC updated, I've forgotten who's on the CPC.
I am,
right?
yes, so, and there's not much to update everyone on beyond what I covered last time. The committee's still working on developing our initial plan. That will be revisited each year, so it's not written in stone, but you want a good one to start with, obviously. I have, in particular, been working on the goals and criteria related to affordable housing, ran them by Julia O'Neill Welsh, sort of at a high level, ran a couple of ideas by Alan. I might run the sort of goals and criteria I've come up with by others, if anyone else is willing to look at them. Steve, I didn't know if you might be willing to take a look based on the housing production
Yeah,
plan
of
and so
course.
forth. When I was looking at other examples from other towns, there were a couple that I thought could be read to exclude certain kinds of housing. So I'm trying to be very deliberate about the criteria that I include here. I think we were hoping that there was a simple way that we could have like an automatic movement of funds from this organization to the housing trust. There really isn't a way for that. We'd have to apply each year and probably enter a grant agreement, provide them updates and so forth. We're not talking about a lot of dollars. I think initially about $400,000 is expected to be collected from the first year. So say, at least 10% will go towards housing, so maybe $40,000 a year will add up over time. But it might be something that's more, for example, if we take one of these developers and we pony up $40,000 and we apply to this organization for another $40,000, that's a much heftier subsidy for a housing. So it might be, we'll have to think about what we want to do with that. But at a high level, that's where we stand. There is an organization, a nonprofit organization that's very helpful for Community Preservation Act interpretation and application, and they've provided us some links to some grant agreements and so forth that other towns have used in this type of situation. So there are models out there. Hopefully we can get to a pretty simplified version of applying and understanding what it's going to be used for and tracking the funds and so forth.
That sounds good. Any questions?
So,
I'm guessing the first year, we won't have any money in the CPC fund until the end of this fiscal year, right?
Started
Just-
in fiscal year 24, so back in July through July. So there should be
Yeah,
some
yeah,
now.
Next
Yeah.
fall, there'll be money in there that we can talk about.
Yeah, and we'll get a small state match. It probably won't be very
Right.
much,
Yep.
but we should get some funds from the state.
Super, so we just keep tracking the progress and we're in good shape.
I'm going to suggest that maybe at October, or if the timing's better, our November meeting, maybe Sarah can sort of present the goals as they are, and we can discuss them and provide feedback as a committee.
Or maybe we could provide the entire plan similar to the housing production plan, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so I
Yep.
think what we're generally doing is looking what other towns have as their plans and using that as a starting point. I will say when it comes to the housing goals or criteria, again, there were just a couple that I don't like that are pretty common because if you wanted to use them to push back against certain housing developments, you could if you wanted to look at it that way. So I'm trying to be a little bit more creative with those than necessarily just looking at what other towns and other plans are doing.
Yeah, suggest
Well,
we need to be, yeah, Alan, go ahead.
So I was gonna say, I think that would be good then, if we discussed it as a full trust at an upcoming meeting, and then we could, as those are finalized, we could provide a memo of support.
Right, and any additional thoughts, exactly. That would probably be good, because again, we've got, between all of us in the trust here, we've got a lot of collective experience, and it's good to draw from that, certainly.
I mean, there are some communities where the housing trusts or the housing committees and the CPC organization don't have warm relationships because of the way the CPC structure was set up. So we want to try and make sure we have a setup that will allow us to have a cooperative, supportive relationship with the CPC.
Absolutely, yes. And as part of that, again, to the extent we are seeking grant money, and I assume we would. I assume that's, part of our funding plan going forward. They would want reports, maybe every 6 months or something, on how that money is being used. So there would definitely be opportunities formally as well as, informally, just with my participation or interacting with other members of that committee to build those relationships and hopefully all work together, again, towards common goals for the town.
Great.
Thanks, Sarah.
Alan, quick update on Baylor Ave?
Yeah, so things weren't really moving very quickly on Baylor Avenue. So Ed and I reached out to Mark Hagan and the team at MCO. We reminded him that September 17th is the deadline for the land development agreement for him to have his building permit in place. That certainly got things moving because at that point we could vote to take the property back and look for a different developer. I'm happy to report that he actually has been very active on the site. I believe at this point the asbestos removal is complete. I went by the property over the weekend and it no longer has windows. All of the external siding is gone. So that work looks complete. He still needs a demolition permit, and that requires physical disconnection of the water line and approval from the Board of Health for his plan to decommission the septic system. So that's all in the works. Per the land development agreement, we can extend the deadline by 60 days. Given the level of activity, I think that is a good idea.
So we need a motion
Any
to
questions?
extend the LDA.
I move that the.
Yeah, I would move.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kate.
You can make the motion, Alan. You wrote it. I was just going to do it for you. But
Go for it. I'm away.
I move that the land development agreement for 3 Baylor Ave, that the trust extend the deadline for obtaining a building permit by 60 days to November 16th, 2024.
Second?
Second.
Second. Any other conversation? All in favor? Roll call vote. Alan?
I actually have one quick
Sorry.
question.
Edinburgh, yes?
The extension for 60 days, is that all the extension that can be provided, or is
No, we can extend again.
it can be, okay, I was just curious if there was something that was
But I mean,
Yeah,
hard lined or,
we should be able, we could further extend it. Technically, that would be a modification to the LDA.
okay.
Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Alan, thank you very much for
following it.
calling them. Yes.
Kate?
I do have a question.
Yeah,
Or-
okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, or did you have one first? Okay. I was just wondering, do we still have comfort that this will be generally on time, shovels in the ground, construction, so forth, based on the conversations and interactions you've had, Alan?
Yes, he's definitely moving forward. He submitted detailed plans to the building department. They had questions. He did some additional engineering work and provided those updates to them. So he's actively moving forward with the project.
Good news. Thank you. Thanks for doing that follow-up. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Sorry for moving too fast. Kate, you in favor of the motion?
Storm in favor of the motion.
Herrera, yes.
Salzman, yes.
Rundell, yes.
Roush, yes. I just think
Edinburgh, yes.
we need to move on along a little bit. We're getting kind of late.
Yeah.
Project updates, rental assistance.
Very briefly, we talked about RAP earlier. The contract signed. We just need to schedule the kickoff meeting. I'll get that moving. And with the Homeborough DPA program, Metro West is waiting for some legal advice on contract-related language related to indemnification. And so once that's resolved, we'll get the contract finalized. And we are looking now to start drafting the actual grant and loan agreements that would be signed by the buyers. So I've reached out to other programs to get theirs as samples that we can work with council on creating.
Very good. Other questions?
No.
Any issues or correspondence? Alan, do you have anything? Kate?
Nope.
Anybody have any other issues? Nope. Good meeting. I think we're ready to adjourn. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Second. All in favor? Alan, you in favor?
Edinburgh, yes.
Storm, yes.
Herrera, yes.
Salzman, yes.
Rundell, yes.
Roush, yes.
Thank you, Westborough TV.
Thank you, Westborough TV.
Thank you all.
I was gonna say at that point, Alan's vote.
Thank
doesn't
you, Ed.
matter.